Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Inept General, and this is my Total War Warhammer 2 Likely Future DLC update video. Now, I've done one of these previously. I did a future DLC predictions video before even the Norska DLC was announced. So I thought I'd revisit it now that we have Total War Warhammer 2 out. We know what the factions are. We know what units are out. So I thought we'd go over it again and see if we can get maybe a more accurate read on what the potential future DLC will look like for Total War Warhammer 2. So let's start by looking at the free LC stuff that's been announced so far, and that is the new Mortal Empires campaign, a new Legendary Lord. Now, for those of you who are maybe new to how Creative Assembly do these things, who are the developers of Total War Warhammer, with the Legendary Lords and all the announcements, there's usually a hint as to the faction in the background. So with this first new Legendary Lord that we're going to get for free, probably with the first DLC pack, it looks like it'll be a new Skaven Legendary Lord, and then we have an experiment. I have really no idea or even where to begin to guess what that might be. And then we get a High Elf Legendary Lord for free, and we get a Lizard Man Legendary Lord for free. Now, I just want you guys to bear that in mind as we go through this. There are a few free lords coming up, one for almost each faction for start of Total War Warhammer 2, except for the Dark Elves, but I'm sure there'll probably be a free Dark Lord Legendary Lord down the line at some point with these clouded over areas. But for now, let's just continue on and talk about sort of some races and things I'm going to exclude and give you the reasons why. So if you look at a world of Warhammer, we see that the first game was here. The second game, the Vortex map, covers these areas here roughly, and the third game is looking to probably cover here and here. Now, originally, I'd hypothesized that the third game would cover the areas to the north and south wastelands, but the way the map here on the Mortal Empires looks, it just looks like there's a whole bunch of space to the east. Now, you might say that's just the way they did it to include the names, but I've seen kind of breakdowns of maps before, and looking at the kind of Russian breakdown, it looks like this is going to be the map for all three games, so there's not really a lot of space to expand except to the east. So that's probably the area we're going to end up going in direction. We could still go to the north, who's to say, but it looks like it's more going to be to the east, which includes the Ogre Kingdoms, the Chaos Dwarves, probably, I'm going to guess, they're going to include parts of the Eastern Empire as well, so they can include Kislev, and they can include the Chaos Demon armies, really. Now, those are probably going to be the starting factions: Kislev, Demons of Chaos, Ogre Kingdoms, and the Chaos Dwarves. Or alternatively, they just split the Demons of Chaos into 4 different armies for each one of the Chaos Gods. That's yet to be seen. But that's why I'm not going to include any of those mentioned races in our future DLC breakdown. Those, I think, aren't going to make an appearance until Total War Warhammer 3, so I'll put them on the back burner for now. But going forward, what are we looking at for DLC in Total War Warhammer 2? We're probably looking at some new races. Now, in Total War Warhammer 1, we had the Beastmen, we had the Wood Elves, and we had Bretonnia introduced into the game. So that's several new races. So we can kind of think there might be an approximate number added to Total War Warhammer 2. So those races, I think let's start with the one we're probably most certain about, and that is the Tomb Kings. Essentially, ancient Egyptian mummy army, chariots, bowmen skeletons, another undead faction, tied in their history to the vampire counts, but for the most part, they kind of stand on their own. So we're definitely going to get Tomb Kings. I'd be very surprised if Tomb Kings wasn't, in fact, the first DLC we get. Now, if it follows the kind of pattern of Total War Warhammer 1, that will be the first DLC package for Total War Warhammer 2. So, in the first game, we had the Beastmen was the first one to come out, if you don't count Blood and Gore, which we've already had for Total War Warhammer 2. So, for my money, Tomb Kings is what we're probably going to get sometime next month. If you're watching this in the far-flung future, that's probably December 2017, I'm guessing, in the run-up to the holidays. Now, the next one I think will be a Dogs of War stroke Southern Realms army, looking at the armies of maybe Tilia, Estalia, the new colonies on the Lustrian map. So this would be a faction that could be introduced both in the New World and the Old World, and I think it will be based on a Dogs of War army. Now, for those of you sharp-eyed followers of mine out there, there is the building chains for the Southern Realms. So Miragliano, Tilia, they have their own building chains now, and their own special buildings if you hover over their colonies. So that's something worth bearing in mind. It looks like we will get a kind of Southern Realms army, and it will be based on the Dogs of War. I've recently just finished a 3-part series on the whole Dogs of War army faction list. Do check the top right hand corner now, or a link in the description below to have a look at that. That goes over all the regiments, how the armies work, how they play, and just what currently makes up the parts of the world that they come from. So do check that out. So I think Dogs of War, which was an old army book, it had been released about the same time Britannia had last been released. So despite the fact it's old, I still think we're going to see it in some mode or fashion in Total War Warhammer 2. Now, the debate is whether it will be a horde faction or a settlement faction. Now, the building chains in the new sort of Tilia seem to suggest that it will be a faction with buildings and will settle in areas and will run kind of like a normal faction rather than a horde. But they could go either way of it still, but it just seems to be pointing in the direction of a kind of settlement-based faction at the moment. Now, for those of you who have no idea what they are, they're essentially a mercenary army. They can have goblins in there, they can have dwarves. It's essentially a whole mix and match of armies in the Warhammer world. Kind of like rogue armies are currently in Total War Warhammer 2. But moving on from Dogs of War, the third one I think we're likely to see is Araby. Now, this seems to be the most likely. Now, this is because Araby never had a tabletop Warhammer fantasy army, but they did have an army in something called Warmaster. Again, I've covered the whole army of Araby and some of their potential legendary lords in my Araby video. Again, do check the top right hand corner on the eye, or do check the description below for the link to my Araby video. But they have a whole bunch of fun units, flying carpets, very kitsch, very funny, like genies, all kinds of weird stuff in their potential army. So I think Araby is probably the next best bet after the Dogs of War. Now, technically, that would take us up to matching the Total War Warhammer 1 tally if we don't count Norska. But Norska was kind of a made-up faction that they kind of put together from bits of Chaos armies and stuff like that. But for the most part, if you're going for maybe made-up factions that don't have a full roster as of yet by themselves, we could maybe look further afield as a fourth part, maybe as a potential bonus to Total War Warhammer 3, which is likely to come out within the next year and a half at least, and that might be the Amazons. So all-female faction, rocking around in Lustria, kind of chaotic. They, can cause trouble. But there's no sign of the Amazonian island or anything like that in Total War Warhammer 2 Mortal Realms, so it seems an unlikely bet at this stage, but still a fun army. Again, check out their video in the link in the description below. And last but not least, the part that does physically exist in Total War Warhammer 2 The Mortal Realms is Albion, but there's no settlement on the island. There is on the Vortex map, so we may see an Albion faction with the Giants of Albion, the Truthsayers, the Dark Sorcerers, the Fen Beasts. All kinds of things have gone on there. Again, I've done a full video on Albion as a faction. Do check the description below for that. So those are the potential races I could see being added in as factions in Total War Warhammer 2, which would be added in both into the Vortex map and into the Mortal Realms map, which is the whole combined Warhammer world map. So that's my sense on it. I think that's about it. That's about all we can hope for. That's kind of the pool that Creative Assembly are playing for. As I said, if we're going to have to pick 3 of them, I'm probably going to pick Tomb Kings, Dogs of War, and we're probably looking at Araby as well. And that's probably going to be it for races in Total War Warhammer 2. If they add any of the others, I'd be over the moon. It'd be fantastic to see. But it looks like that's about it, really. So moving on from the races, let's start to have a look at the Lord Packs. Now, Lord Packs in Total War Warhammer 1 worked in that they'd kind of match up 2 pairs of lords from 2 warring factions. Now, the warring factions in Total War Warhammer 1 were men and vampire counts, and dwarves and greenskins. Now, in Total War Warhammer 2, if you're looking at those kind of matchups, we're looking at high elves and dark elves and Skaven and lizard men. So with that in mind, let's have a look at the most likely packages we're probably going to get. And for me, all my money, I'd almost bet my house on it, that the first one we're probably going to get, considering the Dark Elves and the High Elves, and I talked about this in my first video, that's how kind of predictable it is the sort of Queen and the Hag package, or it's going to be called something the Beauty and the Hag, something very similar to that, which will feature Helbron, the kind of Pope of the religion of Cain in the Dark Elves, and Elariel, the kind of queen of the High Elves. Now, she kind of has a lover in Tyrion, so, you know, that might come out around February. We're looking at maybe a Valentine's Day pickup for the ladies there, and that's kind of maybe where this might turn up. Now, as far as when Elariel's introduced, there will be some units with these Lord packs, as we've seen previously in Total War Warhammer 1. Now, these aren't all the units I think it could be included, but these are kind of the units that tie in most to their character. So, what you're looking at for Elariel is you're looking at Handmaidens, which is a hero unit, which can hand sort of a hybrid warrior and missile unit, which can be a hero, and you're looking at Sisters of Avalon, which are just essentially a very high-end magical missile unit, kind of not dissimilar to maybe Sisters of the Fawn or something like that, but that's the Sisters of Avalon. If you want a bit more detail on all these units, do check out my army videos, and I'll put a link to the whole series of army videos I've done in the description below or in the top right-hand corner now. So those are the two most closely linked with Elariel, the Everqueen. These are her units. They're kind of her bodyguard. They look after her. They'd be the most likely to be introduced with her package. Now, the other one we're looking at is, now that we're on High Elves, let's talk about what the potential future free Legendary Lord for the High Elves might be. Now, he's going to be the fourth one, so we're not going to see the free Legendary Lord for the High Elves for a while, but just while we're on the topic, I thought we'd go over some options. Now, probably leading the pack on the options for a free Legendary Lord is probably Alif Anar. Now, he is, again, a hybrid missile warrior, but he is also kind of the leader of something known as the Shadow Warriors, and they're very cool guys, but this guy just really has a hard-on for killing Dark Elves. That's kind of his main philosophy. If you'd like a bit more detail on him, do check out my likely Legendary Lords for the High Elf video. Again, a link for that will be in the description below. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on who he is, just bear this in mind, he just hates Dark Elves. His family are originally from Nagaryth, with a point in the Total War Warhammer 2 map where you see all the I think it's Dark Elves, or maybe it's separate factions settling, and he just hates them, kills them whenever he can. They messed up his homeland, and he's really pissed off about it. And with him would come his unit of Shadow Warriors if they were to introduce him as a free Legendary Lord for the High Elves. Another option is Eltharion. Now, Eltharion's probably a less likely option because he might turn up a little bit later on, but you never know. But Eltharion was a famous lord. He has a very famous kind of duel with a greenskin known as Grom the Paunch, who invaded Ulthuan at some point. I think the first and last greenskin ever to do so. And he managed to save the city that Grom the Paunch was sieging. He rides around on a griffin, which makes him kind of unique for the lords, at least we have so far in Total War Warhammer 2. And he's kind of like a lore master. So he does a bit of magic. He also is a pretty good combatant as well. So that's Eltharion. And with him would probably come Griffin units, like another Griffin as an option for the High Elves, because they do have it in their army list, but it hasn't appeared in Total War Warhammer 2 yet. That would be the one that would make most sense for his introduction. Again, as I said, there are more missing units in the High Elf army. These are just the ones in my head that are most closely related to these characters, and so would make the most amount of sense and kind of the most predictable that would be added in with these Legendary Lord packs. After that, we're looking at kind of a long shot here, very long shot. Imric of Caledor was an old legendary lord for the High Elves. He was the head of Caledor, he's the Prince of Caledor, and he kind of got phased out of the High Elf army books after a while, but it would be good to have a legendary lord on a dragon. That would kind of be fun, and he'd give a huge bonus to probably dragon princes and other dragon riders as well, and dragons themselves. That'd be kind of fun to have as a legendary lord. And with him, you could introduce the unit of dragon mages, who are mages who ride on dragons dragons, which we don't have in the High Elf army as of yet, but they can only do fire magic. That's kind of their restrictive aspect there. So that could be a fun little package, Imric of Caledor, but again, maybe a bit of a long shot because most of the legendary lords in Total War Warhammer series are based on the 8th edition, and Imric wasn't a character in 8th edition for the High Elves of the Warhammer game. So let's move on from there and talk about Helbron. As I said, she is the kind of Pope of the Cult of Cain, which is the god of murder for the elves, who most of the Dark Elves worship, and she kind of runs their religion. Now, most of the units tied in with her are like the Executioners, Assassins, all these units which are either explicitly tied to her city or to the Cult of Cain itself. Now, the problem is that they're all already in the game. So my thinking along Helbron, with Helbron and Alariel going head-to-head, now in the lore, they don't, I mean, they kind of have conflicts of ideology, but there's no real particular fight between them. I mean, they both have much more of a gripe with Marathi, who's already in the game, than they do with each other. So that's kind of where most of their sort of venom should be kind of directed. But, you know, for the sake of the package, they'll put the two ladies together. And on the theme of ladies, I figured, as we already have the Executioners, the Assassins, we're probably looking at the introduction for the Dark Elves of Medusas, and maybe an upgraded version of Medusas with them on their Bloodrack Shrine, which will operate much like the the Shrine of Cain we've already seen in Total War Warhammer. And as you see, even in the Games Workshop model, it looks exactly the same as the Shrine of Cain model, except they've changed the top a little bit. Apart from that, it's almost exactly the same model. They've just done a few minor changes. So we'll probably see it the same way in Total War Warhammer. We might also see on the woman theme the Sisters of Slaughter. Now, these are old gladiators from the Dark Elves. Like, they come from a gladiator kind of, I don't want to say cult, kind of a gladiator conglomerate. Like, a bunch of gladiators got together, they're like, we're all ladies, and we'll form the Sisters of Slaughter, and they're kind of another rampaging, frenzying unit that can go around for the Dark Elves. So we might see the introduction of those two kind of female-orientated units to match up with the Handmaiden and the Sisters of Avalon, and so that'll be like a whole women package, I think, for the Lord packs for Total War Warhammer 2. Moving on to the potential. Now, the Dark Elf Free Lord wasn't in any of the Free LC to date, but they've done one for every other Lord, so you'd think they'd probably throw in a Dark Elf Lord, and the top money is on Malleus Darkblade. Now, Malleus himself is a guy who's like half possessed by a demon. There's a whole book about him, and I kind of go into him a little bit. I don't go into a huge detail about Malleus, but he's kind of a fun character. He's very much beloved by Dark Elf fans, and on the kind of aspect of maybe possession by chaos and stuff like that, with him could come the Doomfire Warlocks, who are guys who have their kind of souls semi-possessed by Slaanesh, if I remember correctly. So it could kind of fit in thematically with Malleus Darkblade, although he doesn't have any direct ties to the Doomfire Warlocks per se. It's just kind of a theme that might tie them together as a unit introduced when he's perhaps introduced as a free legendary lord. Now, moving on to the next packet, we have the Prophet of Sotek and Lord Nurglich. Now, I thought this was going to be the original packet. This is the one I put together in the last video because the Prophet of Sotek has a big gripe against Clan Pestilence. Clan Pestilence was trying to take over Lizardmen territory. They spread the plague all over the Prophet city. He spoke to this kind of new, well, not new god, but a god who wasn't really widely recognized, this snake god. And he managed to turn the tide of battle against all of Clan Pestilence and drive them off of Lustria. This is why I thought we'd maybe see Lord Nurglich, who's the head of Clan Pestilence, although his right-hand man is Skrulk, who's already in Total War Warhammer 2. So a long shot is we maybe see Nurglich, although I doubt it. He does have potential for the future free Skaven legendary lord, but it probably won't be him. Looking at the Skaven roster, what we're much more likely to see is the Prophet of Sotek introduced along with Ikit Claw. Now, Ikit Claw is the kind of equivalent, like what Queek is to Clan Moulder, what Skrulk is to Clan Pestilence, Ikit Claw is to Clan Scryer. Now, these guys are very much the engineers of the Skavendom, and most of the units that they kind of have in the army book aren't in the Total War Warhammer 2 army. So looking at Ikit Claw, So actually, sorry, going back, looking at the Prophet of Sotek, we have him, and his units will probably be skink linked. Because he's a skink legendary lord, that's fairly rare, so all of his theme of his units will probably be skink or Sotek linked itself. Now, the first and most obvious one is the Ark of Sotek, which is a war machine that's put on the back of a Bastiladon, and all snakes just pour out of it, forming this radius around it where all units around it take damage. The idea is that they're getting eaten or bitten or strangled by snakes, and that's the idea of the Ark of Sotek. I think we'll definitely see this unit introduced with the Prophet of Sotek, and although they've said they haven't quite figured it out yet, if they're ever going to do it, it's probably with the DLC of the Prophet of Sotek. Otherwise we'll never see swarm units in the game, and that is the idea of the jungle swarm, this kind of moving carpet of lizards and snakes that are very much tied to the Prophet of Sotek as well. So that's the idea of his most thematically linked units. Now, if we're just sticking to the wider theme of skinks and him bossing up skinks and making skinks relevant, much like the way Skarsnik did for goblins in the Warlord DLC, we're looking at salamanders hopefully introduced with their skink handlers. Now, the Lizardmen army badly needs these guys. They need some missile units that can do some damage, and salamanders will operate a lot like Iron Drakes. They won't be as hardy, they won't have the armor, they're obviously living things, but they'll operate like Iron Drakes and Warp Fire Throwers and things like that, I imagine, in Total War Warhammer 2. Also a very iconic Lizardman unit. It was a bit bizarre not to see them in the starting lineup, so we'll probably get salamanders as well with the Prophet of Sotek. And on the skink theme, continuing down, Razordons, a bit unlikely, but they'd kind of be the equivalent of armor-piercing crossbows, maybe with more limited range than that, but they're kind of the armor-piercing equivalent to the salamanders. And then we're looking at the Ripperdactyls, which is a melee-focused variant of the Pterodons, to really get to not be afraid. They're not as fragile as Pterodons. They can go in there and cause huge amounts of damage, much like maybe the Hippogriffs are to the Pegasus Knights in Total War Warhammer 1. These are just a bit of a beef-up to them and can do a bit more damage. Obviously, they maybe wouldn't have missiles, so they'd just be a pure, almost flying melee cavalry, which is a pretty fun idea. So Ripperdactyls maybe as well. And last but not least, although this will cost far too many Charlemagnes, I think, is the possibility of the Troglodon, which is a very specialized unit I won't go into in full detail here. Do check my Lizardmen Army video for the full details of this guy, but the Troglodon would be a fantastic addition if they were to add him in with the Prophet of Sotek. A massive, fantastic mount for skinks. It would be great to have it on the battlefield. Now, in terms of the Lizardmen Freelord, which I think is the last one, is the fifth one. It's the last one we see on the Free LC revealed so far. Now, the front runner would probably be Lord Croak. Now, this is a Slann Mage Priest, but he's dead. He's long dead. He died in the initial Chaos invasion, but he does still, his spirit still hangs around his body. He doesn't really communicate as such, but he can still interact with the physical world and cast spells. But he could be a fun little addition. And, he's also a very legendary Lizardman character, so we could possibly have Lord Croak. He's what they call a Relic Priest, I think it is, and we've actually seen them. If you've done all the rituals for the Lizardmen, you actually see them interact, like the little Croxigor and his skink buddy on their adventures interact with one of these Relic Priests. I don't think it's Lord Croak himself, but it's one of them. He's not the only one by any means, so we'll see maybe the introduction of him with other Relic Priests. But he only has one spell, which makes it a bit weird, but he can kind of spam that spell is the idea, at least on the tabletop. So that's Lord Croak. Another option that I would love to see is Gorok. Now, Gorok, I think, is officially a hero, so he's not necessarily a general, so that might put him off the Legendary Lord list. But Gorok, the white terror that he is, would be an absolutely fantastic addition as a free Lizardman Legendary Lord. And then the other one on the skink theme might be Teto Echo. Now, if they did Teto Echo, you could split it between all these skink-related units, which are really all that's missing from the Lizardmen army. You could split it between Teto Echo and the Prophet of Sotek, and then just have the skink gap in the Lizardmen army filled with these two legendary lords. Now, he's, again, with any of the stories for any of these characters I've mentioned, do check my likely legendary lord videos, obviously the Lizardmen edition for these guys. Yeah, moving on from there, that's who I think will be the 3 legendary lords. Now onto the Skaven with Ikit Claw. Now, as I said, all of his units that are missing are Clan Scryer units. So you're looking at things like Warplock Jadales, which are sniper rifles with pervases in front of them, which give them missile resistance. So those would be a great addition. You're also looking at other engineering things like the Rattling Gun, which is a minigun artillery team. Pretty fun. And you're looking at stuff like the Poisoned Wind Mortars, a mortar for the Skaven, and the Doom Flayer, this kind of mini chariot of spinning metal knives that can just charge into things. And with Blood and Gore, that would look fantastic charging into a unit. But all of these units are Clan Scryer related, which is why Ikit Claw for me is the leading contender for any kind of Lizardman Skaven Lord pack that we might see in the future. Now, as far as the free Skaven Lord, Nurglich was one bet, but I would be baffled if it wasn't actually Thanquol. Now, Thanquol is by far, he's a Gracia legendary lord. He's by far the most famous Skaven legendary lord out there by miles, by absolutely miles. There's so much lore. He's featured in the Gortrex and Felix books. He's the main antagonist in the Shadow of the Horned Rat video game, which is an old classic Warhammer video game. He's just like a very iconic character in the Warhammer world, and the fact he wasn't one of the starting legendary lords is perhaps one of the biggest roster surprises in Total War Warhammer 2. But he should probably be, unless they're mad, probably the first Skaven legendary lord for free. Because I don't see him necessarily fitting into a Lord pack, because the Ikit Claw just fits better with all the units that are missing from the Skaven army. But he would make a fantastic free addition, and I think everyone should have him who bought Total War Warhammer 2. And I imagine his starting position might be Skaven Blight itself on the Mortal Realms map. I think they saved... It's weird that you have 2 legendary Skaven lords and none of them start at the Skaven capital. That's just maybe a bit weird. But this guy, I think, might take up that slot and make him placed there and just let you start out from Skaven Blight itself. That's my top theory for the free legendary lord for Skaven, who in fact is going to be the next piece of free LC we get, and I really hope it is Thanquol and his Rat Ogre Ride Mount Bone Ripper. Now, another possibility for a legendary lord is Squeal Nortooth, who's this special character who's known as a Packmaster. Now, Packmasters usually have special rules around controlling, like, more animalistic Skaven units. And the only reason I've included him at all is not because he's particularly famous, but more because he fills some other gaps in the Skaven army, which is namely Packmasters themselves, giant rats, and rat swarms. And he would kind of make a good legendary lord to introduce those units in with, but I think everyone would prefer to see Thanquol over this guy. So we'll have to wait and see what they do with Nortooth, but he just fills a gap, so I thought I'd include just mentioning him out loud. Now, I've already had a running theory that Creative Assembly would be mad not to sell lords from the First World races and include them in Total War Warhammer 2. Now, what these would be, effectively, is lord packs, which give you an excuse for Total War Warhammer 2 only owning players to get into the Mortal Realms, to play as the Empire, to play as all of these other factions on the Mortal Realms map, but by able to simply buy a piece of content for Total War Warhammer 1. So let's just go through my idea here. Now, this might be the experiment, but this is just something I think they're going to do, and it's something we haven't seen yet. So this is my just going off on a mad theory about what they might possibly do. So I think they'll introduce legendary lords of the goblins, the vampire counts, even some, maybe even Bretonnia, the beastmen, the wood elves, stuff like that, just to allow you to have a chance to play as those factions, even if you don't own Total War Warhammer 1. But I think this will be much further down the line. So the legendary lords I see them introducing are starting with Grom the Paunch, who I mentioned earlier. He had his big fight with Eltharion. They have a matchup. It would be a good fight if they are both included in the game. And so I think he'll definitely make an appearance at some point, hopefully in the either fittingly in the Vortex map, or even if he made it into the Mortal Realms map, he'd fit perfectly well as well. So Grom the Paunch, his little story is, just to give you, I go through his story in a lot of detail in my Greenskins likely legendary lords or missing legendary lords video, and he is a guy who ate, I think it was ogre meat. And it kind of, because ogres regenerate, the flesh started to swell inside him, and he didn't cook it, so it just kept growing, and it gave him this kind of paunch, but made him extremely strong as well, because he's just a normal gobbo, but he's meant to be absolutely huge. So, moving down from Grom the Paunch, as I said, he had the big fight with Eltharion. He'll be the Greenskin representative. For the Empire, I struggled with this one because there's not a lot of Empire history in the sort of New World and down in Ulthuan, but I figured they could spin some kind of yarn about Kurt Helborg, who's the Marshal of the Reichsguard, kind of the Empire's #1 general. He's kind of Karl Franz's right-hand guy. He runs the kind of Empire armies when Karl Franz is busy actually running an empire rather than leading armies out to the battlefield. So Kurt could have been sent down to the Southlands or something, to Suddenburg, the colony in Araby, and to look after that colony and just to report in. Then he gets caught out by a Tomb King invasion or something. So we might see Kurt Helborg. You could tie him in narratively. He's the only one I could think of, really. And he's a great guy. I mean, look at that helmet. It's just baller. So moving on from Kurt Helborg, we have Thoric Ironbrow. Now, Thoric I put in because Thoric Ironbrow is kind of the Rune Master legendary lord for the dwarves. Now, I put him in because he has kind of an obsession with digging up old relics and restoring the dwarves to their previous power. So you could introduce Thoric with the idea that he is trying to go from the Badlands down to Karak Zorn to rediscover Karak Zorn, and that would fit in very thematically with the character himself. Again, if you want to know more about Thoric, look at my Dwarves Missing Legendary Lord video. You'll see a whole bunch about him there. But that's my idea for Thoric as the dwarf representative. Now, with the vampire counts, you could either have Ushoran or Wushoran. Now, technically, both of them are dead, but I think Wushoran kind of passes his soul into new bodies. He's a bit weird. He's very good at the mystical arts, but I think he's actually already in the game. I think there's already a starting legendary lord for the Necrox called Wushoran, but he just hasn't been given a character model yet. So give him a character model, and then let him be a special character for the vampire counts in Total War Warhammer 2 Vortex map. And for Chaos, you have Galrosh. Now, Galrosh used to be a high dragon. He fought with the High Elves when they were defending themselves against the first Chaos invasion, but he ate a greater demon, and it absolutely buggered him up, and he became completely corrupted by Chaos, turning into Galrosh, the legendary two-headed dragon. Now, we've seen this model, this kind of Galrosh Chaos Dragon model used already in Total War Warhammer 1. I think they just have to make him bigger, maybe give him a bit of a color differential, and you kind of have a legendary lord already done. It's maybe the easiest one they could possibly do. They've kind of done all the animations for the two-headed dragon, give him 2 different breath attacks, and you're probably in the money there. So Galrosh could be the Chaos representative. He has a history on Ulthuan. Now, I struggled for the Beastmen here, but this is not the best. It's kind of a bit of a glistening model, but it's the best model I could find of this character, known as Moonclaw. Now, Moonclaw is kind of a mess of a creature, but his motivations are that he fell from the green moon of the Warhammer world, which is the Warpstone moon. So he's very kind of chaos magic-y, and no one can really understand what he says, and they only call him a Beastman because no one can really figure out what the hell he actually is. He's kind of a mess. He just has horns and kind of looks like a Beastman. beastmen. So they just kind of follow him because he kind of exudes this aura and is powerful. And obviously he fell from the moon that the beastmen worship. So like, we'll probably follow this guy around. But he's incoherent, and he has this incoherent double-headed creature that also he uses as a mount. But his like passion in life seems to be destroying waystones. So the waystones that surround Ulthuan, the waystones that surround the forest of Athel-Loren. So you could have him appear in Ulthuan looking to destroy the waystones around the island. So Moonclaw would fit thematically and nicely in with the Vortex map. And then you finally have Ariel, the Queen of the Wood Elves. Now, she would be absolutely fantastic because she has a huge gripe with Morathi. Morathi sorted it out, so Morathi was essentially responsible for killing her sister. And Ariel at one point realized this, tracked down Morathi, was about to kill her, but Morathi offered to make her more powerful by teaching her the dark arts, which Ariel accepted at the time in hope of restoring Athel-Loren to its kind of former glory, but it corrupted her and ended up leading to a whole dark age in Athel-Loren. So technically she should be doubly pissed at Morathi. Number one, for killing her sister. Number two, for absolutely buggering up her forest and herself for a good long time. So Ariel could be introduced on the path of vengeance against Morathi. And then for the Bretonnia, I thought the double team of Baron Odo and Suleiman could make an appearance. Now, these two guys rocked around during the Crusade, so technically if they lived normal human lives, they're dead. But you could make up some kind of narrative that the Lady of the Lake gave them the Grail, they drank from it, and Grail Knights have been known to live an exceedingly long time, so you could pull that excuse out. It's not necessarily bang on the money, but they're probably the most fitting guys to be rocking around the bit of Araby for Bretonnian army. Now, these guys are really old. I think they were only in the first ever edition of the Bretonnian full army book and never made an appearance again, but they could be included, and they would both have a reason to be rocking around the Araby as a Bretonnia faction. So they would be a fantastic addition to Total War Warhammer 2 Vortex map. And that brings us to about it. So that's the way I see it going, guys. Those two Lord packages, we're going to see So what I see happening, if we're going to match up with what we saw in Total War Warhammer 1, we had the free race packet. So we had the, not counting Chaos and not counting Blood and Gore, we had the Beastmen. The equivalent of the Beastmen in this one will be the Tomb Kings. We had the Grim and the Grave, which was the humans and Dark Elf Lord pack, not Dark Elf, an Undead Vampire Count Lord pack. This will be matched by either the Queen and the Hag, which will be Alariel, and Helbron. And then we have and then after that we had the King and the Warlord, which will be matched by Ikit Claw. So the Claw and the Snake or something like that. And so we're going to have Ikit Claw and the Prophet of Sotek. And then we have the Wood Elves, and that will probably be the Dogs of War army coming in there. And then we had the Bretonnia, and that would maybe be Araby towards the end of the life of Total War Warhammer 2. Now, the issue is here, if they're going to do the old race packs with the Lords, I would love to see it, but that's kind of a bit more up in the air. But I think it would fit in nicely and give Total War Warhammer 2 players only the chance to have Empire armies, the chance to have Greenskin armies and multiplayer and stuff like that, and at least one starting Lord in Total War Warhammer Mortal Realms map that they could start as an Empire Lord and merge with Karl Franz and stuff like that. And, you know, play the actual Empire campaign. So that's my thinking on the DLC, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Hope you enjoyed this updated look at the potential DLC for Total War Warhammer 2. And let me know if you have any other thoughts. Other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all on the next